In the wake of the Benoit family tragedy, the one thing WWE needed in the summer of 2007 was to avoid further scrutiny. However, the WWE roster gave the company's critics all the ammunition it needed when several high-profile stars were named in a steroid scandal that rocked professional wrestling, leading to suspensions, firing, and more. That is the description of today's video, you guys, by Cultaholic Wrestling, and it is called The True Story of the 2007 WWE Steroid Scandal.
In the wake of an unspeakable tragedy, the one thing WWE needed in the summer of 2007 was to avoid further scrutiny. After the Benoit family tragedy, World Wrestling Entertainment was public enemy number one as far as the mainstream media and much of the general public was concerned, with its detractors not needing any more excuses to attack Vince McMahon's spandex-powered empire. WWE's own roster, however, gave the company's critics all the more ammunition it needed when several high-profile stars were named in a steroid scandal that rocked professional wrestling, leading to suspensions, firings, and more. But just how did things get to that point, and what, if anything, did WWE do to fix what was clearly a widespread problem? I'm Jack from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the true story of WWE's 2007 steroid scandal. Join us. WWE was no stranger to a steroid scandal, of course, with Vince McMahon having already gone through a highly publicized trial in 1994. McMahon was facing 3 charges: 2 for the distribution of illegal anabolic steroids, and 1 for conspiracy to distribute anabolic steroids, after being implicated by Dr. George Zahorian, a one-time ringside doctor for WWE events in Pennsylvania, who himself had been convicted of illegally distributing steroids in 1991. At his trial, it came out that Zahorian had supplied the illegal muscle-building drugs to WWE stars, and McMahon was subsequently investigated and indicted. McMahon was found not guilty by a jury, but wasn't taking any chances when it came to his performers, many of whom had looked like walking neon signs for steroid use before the federal government circled in. A drug testing policy was implemented in '92 and had been responsible for various fines and suspensions, as well as for the departures of the likes of the Ultimate Warrior and Davey Boy Smith, who were both caught using human growth hormone. Drug testing was all but dropped at some point in 1996, as it was costing the company too much money. Plus, they were in the middle of a wrestling war, and their competitors, WCW, weren't testing at all. Random tests would still be administered, however, if WWE management believed that an individual or group of individuals had a problem that needed to be addressed. It was no coincidence that physiques that had generally shrunk or gotten a bit softer in the last few years suddenly swelled to Herculean proportions once again once more mandatory testing was phased out. Coincidentally or not, this also corresponded with a sharp uptick in WWE business during the vaunted Attitude Era. It was as clear as day that many on the roster were using, and in some cases abusing, performance-enhancing and other drugs, while WWE's talent relations department continued to dish out suspensions and firings to those who had substance abuse issues. A few were given the ultimatum of checking into a rehabilitation facility or receiving their future endeavors. While there were isolated cases here and there, nobody had died on WWE's watch, so to speak, since Brian Pillman passed away in a Minneapolis hotel room on October 5th, 1997, just hours before he was scheduled to wrestle in a featured match at the Bad Blood pay-per-view. He was only 35 years old. While WWE tried to steer the conversation away from Pillman's drug use after his death, including a frankly abhorrent interview McMahon conducted with his widow Melanie on Raw just 24 hours later, Brian Pillman's problems were well known, and McMahon himself had, in fact, ordered Brian to take a drug test just 5 weeks before his untimely passing. Pillman's test came back positive for prescription painkillers and trace amounts of steroids.
So why was he
Empty
still
bottles
performing?
of prescription painkillers were found next to his body.
Instead
it will
of
be
going
over
to a
8 years
rehabilitation
for another
center?
active member of the main WWE roster to die while out on the road. The effects of it would reverberate across the wrestling industry for years to come. On November 13th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero was, like Brian Pillman, found dead in a Minneapolis hotel room. A former WWE champion and one of the most beloved wrestlers both with fans and in the locker room, Guerrero was just 38 years old and in the midst of another main event run as one of the top stars on the SmackDown brand. His official cause of death was labelled as a heart attack due to heart disease caused by long-term anabolic steroid usage and recent usage of narcotics medication. Though WWE and Eddie himself had pushed the narrative that Guerrero had been totally clean since his return to the company in April 2002, having been fired for drug and alcohol issues the previous year, this was not entirely true. The wrestling version of clean and actually being clean are two different things. And while Eddie may have stopped drinking and using drugs recreationally, he had been using anabolic steroids and human growth hormone to pump up his naturally smaller body, as well as pain medication to deal with the constant chronic agony that was a consequence of his almost 20-year career. The day before flying to Minneapolis for the combined Raw and SmackDown television taping, an exhausted Guerrero visited his doctor and complained that he hadn't been able to sleep for 2 weeks due to the pain he was in, primarily due to his back. So while he may not have been abusing medication at the time of his passing, and the long-term use of various drugs is what ultimately led to his enlarged organs and narrowed arteries, WWE felt compelled to act and hopefully avoid another tragedy. Vince McMahon informed his grieving roster at the November 21st television tapings in Sheffield, England, that the company were going to be implementing a new talent wellness policy, which would cover performance-enhancing drugs, recreational drugs, and the abuse of prescription drugs. All performers under a full-time contract would be subject to frequent random tests by a third-party agency. They would also undergo comprehensive cardiovascular exams and other tests and measures taken to ensure the health of WWE stars. The independent body administering the tests would first inform the performer if there was an issue or anomaly and advise them on what to do before reporting their findings to McMahon. Vince, in his short speech, did not give talent too many details, as things would need to be written up and finalized in the coming weeks. As if to emphasize that there were issues that needed to be addressing, 4 days before the announcement of the return of drug testing, Nick Dinsmore, also known as Eugene, accidentally locked himself out of his hotel room and passed out in the hallway after taking one too many somas following a house show in Manchester.
Excuse me? How do you accidentally do that?
Suspended and ordered to enter rehab. WWE released details of their wellness policy on February 27th, 2006, the same day they had informed their roster at a combined Raw and SmackDown taping. Along with a list of banned substances and some bureaucracy surrounding valid prescriptions and that sort of thing, was the information that a first test failure would result in a 30-day suspension, a second one would result in a 60-day suspension, and a third failure would result in automatic termination. The first round of testing was done at a combined TV taping on March 20th. By that point, it was obvious just by looking at the change in some of the physiques on TV that at least some people were taking this policy seriously. But Chris Benoit was evidently not one of those people. After he did the unthinkable, in the final weekend of June 2007, it was discovered that Benoit's house contained a large quantity of not just steroids, but also prescription painkillers and other drugs as well. Benoit was a client of Dr. Phil Astin, whose office was located some 50 or so miles from the rabid Wolverine's home in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. It soon came out via the DEA's office that Astin had prescribed Benoit a 10-month supply of anabolic steroids every 3 to 4 weeks between May 2006 and May 2007. Not long after his death, Benoit was also named as a client of MedX Life, an internet company based in Florida that signed and sent prescriptions to be filled by a company called Signature Pharmacy. The media, naturally, jumped on this information and posited that the killings had been the result of so-called roid rage and that Benoit must have flown off the handle due to his out-of-whack body chemistry.
That's a thing.
WWE typically moved to steer the conversation away from the issue of steroids and other drugs and shift the focus onto marital issues between Chris and Nancy. And also, the roid rage theory was questioned by those who pointed out the time period that had elapsed between the killings. Chris killed Nancy on the Friday evening, Daniel sometime earlier Saturday morning or afternoon, and then himself on Sunday morning. But the sheer amount of drugs that Benoit had in his home did still send alarm bells ringing. After all, Benoit was, presumably, subject to WWE's talent wellness policy, which had been implemented following the premature death of his very best friend, Eddie Guerrero. Indeed, Benoit had taken his last WWE-mandated drug test on April 10th, 2007, and had passed the test. But how could that be possible? Anyone with even a faint knowledge of the subject could tell just by looking at the 40-year-old Benoit in the months before his death that he was using something to maintain the size and definition that he'd had throughout his career in his younger years. Undersized by the wrestling standards of the time and growing up idolizing the Dynamite Kid, a wrestler who was very open about his own use and abuse of steroids and other drugs, Benoit had likely been using steroids maybe even since the late 1980s. When Benoit's toxicology report came out on July 17th, the results were startling. While he had Xanax and Vicodin in his system at normal therapeutic levels, the amount of testosterone he had in his body was through the roof. His testosterone to epitestosterone ratio was 59:1. To put that in
I
perspective,
don't know
a normal
that
person's
exact-
ratio would be 1-1, while 4-1 would be considered at the upper end of normal and was the
No.
threshold that the Olympics used in their testing program. WWE's own wellness policy allowed for anything up to 10-1, providing that the performer had a valid prescription. Benoit did have that through Dr. Aston under the guise of testosterone replacement therapy, a medical practice commonly used to help people whose systems are not producing enough testosterone naturally. As a lifelong user of steroids and human growth hormone, Benoit's body was failing to now produce enough testosterone by itself.
Dude, that's hormones.
Reports also
like,
suggested that he
basically like having this imbalance in your body. You can't think straight, you can't act straight. Your definition of normal doesn't even exist anymore. It's not only physical, it's mental. It affects every aspect of your life.
maybe had tried failing to now produce enough testosterone by itself. Reports also suggested that he maybe had tried to get off the steroids shortly before the tragedy, but realized that his system was so screwed up from years of use, if not abuse, that the physical and psychological effects of withdrawal would likely be too powerful. The assumption was also that he had used shortly before his own death, hence the staggeringly elevated number. The toxicology report was bad news for WWE, but they attempted to brush past it nonetheless, noting that Benoit had passed 4 steroid tests within the past year, though just how he passed them wasn't readily apparent since WWE wouldn't release the details of his first 3 tests. WWE and some of its wrestlers also attempted to make a distinction between steroids and testosterone during appearances in the media, though the injectable testosterone that Benoit was being prescribed in huge amounts was indeed a steroid. As far as Dr. Aston was concerned, Benoit wasn't his only professional wrestler client. On the contrary, Rey Mysterio, Bob Holly, Lex Luger, Buff Bagwell, Mark Jindrak, and Johnny Grunge were also named as clients of Aston in the week after the tragedy. As embarrassing as the revelation was that at least 2 other contracted WWE stars were getting prescriptions from the disgraced physician, things were about to get a whole lot worse. On August 30th, WWE released a statement notifying that it was suspending 10 of its performers based on information the company had received from investigators from the Albany, New York District Attorney's Office. It also added that from that moment on, WWE would be publicly disclosing the names of people who failed the wellness policy starting on November 1st. WWE had met with the prosecutors from Albany on August 14th, which is likely when they were given a list of all WWE performers who had been clients of Signature Pharmacy, the online steroid selling venture based in Florida. Within hours of WWE sending out its press release, the New York Daily News had named 13 wrestlers who were known Signature clients.
Wait. In a list obtained exclusively by the Daily News, top wrestlers Randy Orton, Charles Haas. Okay, now it's all the
Randy
names,
Orton,
but Randy
Edge,
Orton?
Booker T, Ken Kennedy, William Regal, Chavo Guerrero, Johnny Nitro, Charlie Haas, Shane Helms, Santino Marella, Simon Dean, Umaga, and Funaki. Benoit and Brian Adams, who wrestled as Crush and had passed away on August 13th, age 43, were also known Signature clients, as was Eddie Guerrero. Later in the afternoon of August 30th,
Randy
Shauna Sale wrote an article for
good. So do you
ESPN
think
claiming
he's
that sources
using
close to the
steroids?
investigation had also named Batista and Chris Masters as clients. Not long after
about
that,
John
Sports
Cena or The
Illustrated
Rock?
posted an article naming 14 wrestlers along with the drugs they received and the dates they received them. Batista flatly denied any involvement with Signature Pharmacy via a note on his website, which read, "To my fans and friends, I categorically deny a report on ESPN.com and repeated by other media outlets that I am or ever have been a customer of Signature Pharmacy of
How can we
Orlando,
trust him?
an online pharmacy company that is a target of an investigation by the Albany, New York District Attorney's Office. I am being tested regularly by WWE, and I am in full compliance with the WWE Wellness Program. I regret the inaccurate reporting, and I will do all I can in the future to stop any publication or anyone from making such false accusations." Batista was not one of the wrestlers suspended by WWE, and, in fact, never violated the company's wellness policy. Booker T also denied being a Signature client and was so upset with WWE for slapping him with a 60-day suspension, he had served a 30-day one for a violation earlier in the year, that he asked for his release and received it. Simon Dean, real name Mike Bucci, was fired after being named as a Signature client. He was no longer an active talent, having left his position on SmackDown to help manage WWE's developmental system. He may have been an executive, but Bucci had also had heat internally for a while, and this was deemed the straw that broke the camel's back. Gene Snitsky was not named publicly as a client of Signature Pharmacy, but was suspended for 30 days with the rest of the offenders on August 30th. It should be noted that this wasn't the first Sports Illustrated story of the year to link WWE stars to nefarious ways of securing illegal drugs. In March of 2007, the outlet published an article linking Orton, Edge, Helms, Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero, and Kurt Angle scandal to Dr. David Wilbert of Arizona. Wilbert was under investigation by the DEA for writing 3,879 prescriptions for patients that requested drugs over the internet. Copeland and Helms were listed as having received prescriptions for human growth hormone, which Helms claimed was to treat an injury, while Guerrero and Mysterio were listed as having received stanozolol, with Mysterio also allegedly receiving nandrolone. Orton had received 6 prescriptions for various drugs. It's worth noting, however, that the wrestlers, according to Dr. Wilbert, visited him in person to have blood work done, and that everything he prescribed came in 2004 and 2005, i.e. before the wellness policy was introduced. Now, some of you that are watching at this juncture might be wondering just how these online steroid selling businesses operated. Well, let's try and work it out. Essentially, these clinics would advertise on the internet with websites and sponsored links in search engine results. Customers would contact the clinics via the internet or via telephone. Clinic staff would then explain to them how to demonstrate medical need through questionnaires or blood tests. The clinic then routed blank prescriptions to doctors, usually via email. Doctors signed the prescriptions, which they were paid to do, and then sent them to Signature Pharmacy. Signature then formulated the steroids and other drugs and shipped them to clients via FedEx.
It's like you're ordering it on Amazon.
When an agent easily purchased drugs and got a prescription without having to meet the doctor or provide any evidence of a medical condition. And this scandal, naturally, rocked WWE. Vince McMahon had flown 11 then unnamed wrestlers to WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut for a private meeting to discuss the situation. And, in something that was surely to improve McMahon's mood, was the fact that one wrestler missed their flight and was unable to attend. Looking at the list of offenders, there were some interesting stories that made the situation a whole lot more interesting, and in some cases, a whole lot sadder. Like Chavo Guerrero, for example, receiving and presumably using the same types of drugs that had contributed to the death of his uncle. Or William Regal, whose previous battles with drug addiction were very well documented. And then, there was Mr. Kennedy as well. After the Benoit tragedy, WWE sent out various wrestlers to speak to the media on talk shows, news programs, and for other TV and print outlets. They were basically there to do PR work for the company, and more often than not, didn't give a good, or at least honest, account of themselves or the way things actually were backstage. Chavo, for instance, who was very close to Benoit, said on Greta Van Susteren that not only were people in wrestling not really dying prematurely anymore and there was no drug issue in the industry, but most of the locker room didn't even drink. Kennedy took things to another level when he opened his mouth and promptly put his foot directly in it. Voluntarily appearing on Van Susteren's show, he flatly denied that he was on steroids and claimed that WWE didn't have a steroid problem. No siree, none whatsoever. Then, in a podcast interview with the UK Sun, Kennedy said the following about the steroid situation. "I don't take steroids. I have taken steroids in the past. I never took a lot of steroids, but when I was working the independent scene, I was trying everything I could. I never took massive amounts of steroids, and do you know why I stopped taking them? Because of the wellness policy. Because they instituted the wellness policy, and I knew that having a job with WWE was way more important than the 10 pounds of extra muscle that the steroids gave me. I stopped taking them, and I had the biggest push of my life. I worked with The Undertaker for the last 6-7 months. Working on top of all the house shows, I worked pay-per-views, I was on every pay-per-view, I didn't take any steroids, and that's the thing. Nowadays, in our business, you don't have to take that stuff in order to get a push." Well, his name appearing on the Signature Pharmacy list kind of made him look like a bit of a hypocrite, didn't it?
But that's
Not only did the former US champion lose a ton of credibility because of this, he also lost his push and a planned main event feud with Triple H. You see, the 30 and 60-day suspensions that were being dished out in the wake of the scandal affected ongoing and future WWE storylines. It had been planned that Kennedy was going to be revealed as the illegitimate child of Mr. McMahon as the payoff to that particular storyline. Instead, he was, quote-unquote, fired on the air for impersonating a McMahon, while Hornswoggle was instead named as Vince's son. As if to pile on the misery, in an interview with Fighting Spirit magazine recorded before but published after his suspension, Kennedy once again went to great pains to explain how WWE was zero tolerance when it came to their wrestlers taking steroids. As everyone in the world now knew, that wasn't the case. It was also something that Dr. David Black had admitted publicly in media appearances following the Benoit tragedy. Dr. Black being the founder and chairman of the Aegis Sciences Corporation, who came up with and implemented WWE's drug policy. Other enforced creative changes saw Jeff Hardy beat Umaga for the IC title and CM Punk beat Johnny Nitro for the ECW title. So what did WWE do to deter talent from seeking drugs from these online pharmacies, besides giving locker room rah-rah speeches? Well, as mentioned earlier, WWE did promise to publicly name those who failed the wellness policy, starting November 1st, 2007. On November 2nd, 2007, the company announced that Chris Masters had been suspended for 60 days for his second infraction, while D.H. Smith was also suspended for 30 days.
The thing is that
Masters
even
was
suspensions
released
are
4
like
days later,
publicly
but
known.
he wasn't the only signature client to re-offend. William Regal was slapped with a 60-day suspension on May 20th, 2008, while Umaga would be released on June 8th, 2009 for refusing to check into rehab at the company's request. He would pass away just 6 months later. Randy
that's
Orton,
so
who was
sad.
not suspended with the other signature clients for reasons which were never made completely clear, was suspended for 60 days on May 30th, 2012. Years later, he voluntarily entered drug rehab, which, per the rules of WWE's wellness policy, got one of his 2 strikes
I
removed
really
from
hope
his record.
today he is
There have been
safe.
suspensions and firings related to the wellness policy since the signature pharmacy
And clean.
scandal, but nothing even close to the same scale. At the time, it was the worst possible news for a company that was facing wave after wave of bad press. But,
Yeah.
as they had done when mired in scandal in the past, WWE rode it out, and in a frankly shockingly short amount of time, the signature pharmacy ordeal was all but forgotten about. People just seemed to sort of move on, and nothing ultimately came of a congressional investigation into the company's drug policy, with WWE agreeing to send Congress results of company drug tests dating all the way back to 1998. WWE themselves, perhaps in some part due to the negative publicity stemming from the events of the summer of '07, also moved on, officially changing to a PG-rated product in July of 2008. They may have
think maybe
successfully
that
cleaned up their
helped
image,
too.
at least as far as public perception was concerned,
Yeah.
but the signature pharmacy scandal showed that appearance could be deceiving, and that the
Oh, yeah.
WWE locker room desperately needed cleaning up for good. I've been Jack from Cultaholic. Thank you very much for watching
It
this.
literally took them. Thank you, Jack, so much. Thank you for the video. It literally took them deaths and so many suspensions, so much drama, so much firing for them to learn how bad this is and how to do it and implement these rules the right way. All that I heard from Batista is I didn't get my roids from that place. I have my own. Seeing as he denied Signature Pharmacy of Orlando but not steroids. Honestly, you guys, I feel like any of those wrestlers who are genuinely unnaturally big, I feel like they had to enhance themselves somehow. It's very difficult, especially when you keep aging and under the pressure and under the work and not having enough time. I don't know, like you have to and performing all around the world, like almost every second, third day. Like it is definitely hard without any kind of help, and I feel like the pressure of them doing that in order to become more popular or famous or to get a push and get promoted, all of it affects the business, and a lot of them scramble to that. A lot of them go with that path because it is the easier way, and other ways are almost impossible. RKO looks bigger now than he was back then. This is exactly my question. He bulked up like crazy being out for over a year. His back couldn't have been that bad to come back like that. Almost doesn't even look like the same guy. He looks like how he looked like in the game WWE All-Stars. These comments are like 7 days ago comments, guys. I genuinely don't understand how this is a thing. Like, how does he look like that if he was using steroids back then and he even had to go through rehab? What about now? How can he look at this age that good? Bulking, like, no, dude, I don't know. I really am scared for him, and I hope he's taking it seriously and he's taking care of himself. But that is it for today's video. What a sad video. I'm definitely gonna watch the Benoit documentary, as I said, sooner than later. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more, and see you soon with another one. Have a wonderful day. Bye.